Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this session of webinar where we are going to explore the question of how does nature shape resilient cities. Thanks for joining us. And along with me, there are two other people. I'm going to introduce them in a bit. But just introducing this topic, I just want to mention that cities are often imagined as the opposite of nature. Yet, they're increasingly, uh, we are realizing that it's the ecological process, and these are not external to the city. All the ecological processes or things that we see in the city are not external. They are shaped, and they are also shaping the city, how it becomes resilient. They shape flooding in the city, they shape heat, air quality, biodiversity, food systems, and also sometimes and most of the times social well-being. So today we ask this question of how does nature shape resilient cities, and what does it mean to design with ecology rather than against the ecology, right? To unpack this question and dwell deeper into what are the different ways in which the design of the city can incorporate ecology. I'm joined with two of my colleagues, Mihir Kulkarni. He's assistant professor at School of Environment and Sustainability. Just a line about Mihir: he is an aquatic ecologist who studies patterns of freshwater biodiversity and its underlying ecological and evolutionary processes to develop management strategies for urban freshwater habitats. Uh, Along with me, to my left, is Ravi. Ravi is landscape ecologist and urban ecologist. He focuses mainly on plant-animal interaction, community ecology, and animal behavior, specifically in urban. Thanks for joining me here and Ravi to unpack and dwell a little deeper on the nature in the city, nature of the city, and nature for the city. Uh, I also would like maybe Mihir and Ravi talk a little bit about themselves one by one, and then I have a few questions to ask you. And then we will go to the question and answer or any other clarification, explanatory kind of questions that we have from the audiences. We'll start with Mihir.
Hi everyone, I am Mihir and I mainly work with freshwater ecosystems and the biodiversity these habitats have. We really can't imagine any form of human civilization existing independent of freshwater. So that forms a extremely important and vital resource for any sort of settlements and any civilizations throughout history. One very striking feature is that although we have such a great value for our freshwater systems, uh, we don't really protect them as much. So, if you see the current reports on the loss of freshwater biodiversity across the world, you'll see that these losses are extremely rapid and they are much more severe as compared to the terrestrial or the marine environments as well. So we have seen in the past 3 to 4 decades, there has been roughly a 80% loss in freshwater biodiversity. And this is only for species for which we have some sort of monitoring systems in place. So there are extreme events and extreme threats which these habitats face, and most of the time these threats are not in isolation. So multiple threats, including large scale processes like climate change and very local or specific processes which can be pertinent to a particular city or a particular town, all of these in combination they act on the system. So that is a very big sort of area for which we need a lot of work. Like even if you think about it from a completely human perspective, or if you think about it from a conservation or restoration kind of approach. So you cannot really separate these two out anymore, because as cities continue to grow and they are sort of taking over new natural areas, we need more and more resilient systems. and especially in face of climate change, where a lot of new forms of stresses are emerging out there, having very robust natural ecosystems which are functioning, this is extremely important for conferring some sort of medicine. And this is broadly the theme in which I sort of try to work on. My training has been in the classical ecological sort of space, where you typically will study organisms and the environmental factors in non-urban areas. But increasingly, this whole field of ecology being studied through the lens of urbanization has sort of come up, and this is where sort of I am basing my work in India. Previously, I worked in the Western Ghats and Eastern Ghats, also some parts of the northern India, but now I am also focusing additionally on the urban waterscape, as we can call. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Mihir. That's such a uh, inspiring work, I would say, because when you said functional ecosystem, there are so many different aspects of it resonated, and so many aspects of it came up as a question, right? Like we will dwell upon it little later, but I'll turn to Ravi, and maybe you can talk a little bit about yourself, Ravi, and what you do and background and all.
Yeah, hi Sheetal. Thanks for the introduction and like moderating this webinar. I would like start my journey as an ecologist like from my PhD days. So I would like to tell you about that. So I did my PhD fieldwork in the Western Ghats studying butterflies and their populations and how habitat fragmentation, the type of forest or grasslands that these butterflies are found in, how that affects their populations and connecting it with species traits. And asking simple questions like, are some butterflies more vulnerable to extinction? For example, are smaller sized butterflies more prone to extinction because they can't um, fly across two habitat patches. So that was the gist of my PhD and finding out which species might be more prone to extinction. Now, after joining IIHS, I'm applying the same principles of animal behavior and diversity and studying these butterfly populations to birds and butterflies in the city, but also including anthropogenic stressors such as heat or fragmentation, which is like the most talked about stressor for wildlife in urban areas. Because in urban areas, we get very isolated green patches like parks or campuses that are there, but all the other areas are built up or used up in agriculture or even they are degraded because there is not right kind of vegetation. So in like IHS, I'll talk about one project that I did recently, which focused on studying how climate change or extreme weather events are affecting butterfly behavior. And we found that especially like in context of Bangalore, where we did the study, um, there past 2 years there have been these heat waves and cold spells, and there have been few instances where there were instances of hailstorm. So what we observed was that butterflies are kind of changing their behavior after these extreme weather events. So when there is high rainfall events or extreme heat waves, they are flying more or feeding more in response to these weather events. And what implications it has on their populations is that if the duration of these spells or these events increases, they might not be able to cope up with it, because flying is a very energetically costly activity. And if they have to keep doing this, it might ultimately affect their egg production or even body size. So this is one interesting finding that has come out from this study.
Yeah. Thanks, Ravi. I think there are so many different intersections that we'll have to unpack. Like, you talked about the climatic stresses, but also climatic stresses are uh, driven or, you know, generated because of many different kind of activities that we do in the city. So we'll talk about this a little later. I'll turn to Mihir and just wanted to ask you, Mihir, about, there is so much about narrative about cities are often looked at as degraded ecosystems, and they are not really kind of suitable for certain kind of a species or certain kind of a flora and fauna, right? So I wanted to ask you whether from your research, uh, can you answer how do these ecological in evolutionary processes continue to operate within this urban landscapes? And what surprises you most about urban biodiversity? Because sometimes it is not really expected. Like, you will see that there is pollution, as you said in the beginning, and there is also many different other stressors. So, uh, does that evolutionary process helping to get surprised and see which is not expected? Do you have that feelings, and how do you explain that?
Yeah. So, yes, I mean, there is this large view that we cities are typically having a degraded ecosystems. So, to address it, we can look at it in different lenses. So, for example, if you look at a city which has certain areas, like, say, for example, green spaces or even the water bodies, which have been designed and which have been sort of maintained or restored in a ecologically meaningful way, those places can actually function as well as any natural ecosystems. So it depends largely on how we perceive it and what the situation is. True that if in absence of any regulation we would sort of ecologically degrade the systems, and that is true for across different types of habitats. It need not be only aquatic, it can also be land as well. Like, excess use of certain fertilizers or chemicals or other things, they can degrade the health of the land. But when done in a meaningful way with certain ecological learnings and principles put into the practice, I think cities can actually have they can support a lot of biodiversity. Cities also are now being viewed as very new ecosystems, because if we typically study any natural ecosystem, most of them are poor in resources for the fauna and flora which the resources are very scarce typically, and this distribution of resources is something which is thought to control or bring a cap on the population sizes of different organisms. Now cities, because we can synthesize new resources, we also have supply chains wherein we can transport resources from very long distances across the globe. Now, all of this actually makes cities resource rich as compared to any natural areas, and this itself can have a surprising effect on the biodiversity. So, the same amount of area can actually sustain many more number of species as compared to a resource poor environment. So, this is also a different perspective with which we can look at the biodiversity in cities. The third thing is humans also have aided the sort of movement of a lot of species. So we bring out species from different areas of the world to our houses, to our gardens, to our farms. And this has happened historically. It's not that it is happening right now. So, like, most of the food products we eat today are also not particularly originating in India. So this sort of movement also creates new habitats and new resources for the natural fauna or flora to interact with. And you see very novel interactions happening in cities as well. Now, when you asked about how do the ecological and evolutionary processes, how they continue in urban areas, so interestingly, cities are nested within a broader ecological region. So different cities tend to have very different environmental and climatic conditions. So inherently, the ecology is different. So those changes are those processes do continue. Uh, in terms of evolutionary processes, they are continuing irrespective of your 100% built up area or 100% natural area. Those processes do continue. And interestingly, the fauna, flora, organisms basically they adapt to the changing environmental conditions, which in the case of cities can be different resource availability, different pollution, different chemicals, temperature regimes, light regimes, so on. So this adaptation, this process of adaptation remains throughout the like tree of life. You can find things adapting in natural ecosystems as well as in urban ecosystem. So it's actually very interesting to study cities and how they shape these processes, because cities can have changes in the environment which can either accelerate the process of adaptation for certain specific traits like Ravi was mentioning, or it can be physiological adaptations or so on, behavioral adaptations as well. And this makes it extremely interesting that you have a small area which has so many things happening at the same time, and it can have multiple consequences. So from a purely ecological or evolutionary perspective also, cities studying all this in cities is actually, it also makes more sense.
Yeah, thanks. I think that that thing about ecological intelligence and how do we really bring ecology into our cities planning and doing the infrastructure planning according to the ecological intelligence. We'll come to that question in a bit, but I will turn to Ravi and ask him about, in your experience, Ravi, what does resilience actually mean? We are turning a little bit towards the resilience, and because we are talking about how nature shapes resilience, really about in operational terms for Indian cities, how do we measure whether ecological intervention are truly improving the resilience of the city? How do we measure? What are the different techniques and monitoring indicators that we have to measure the resilience through the ecological lens?
So, definitely resilience is important because if there is no biodiversity or no greenery in the city, it will be difficult for not just the animals but also for humans to survive. Because clean air, clean water, pollination services, everything is related to these things. But if one has to measure resilience, it definitely requires long-term ecological monitoring. And at IIHS, we have set up a long-term ecological observatory in Kengeri precisely for this purpose so that we can monitor the changes that are happening in the city and not just Bangalore. The plan is to do it for other cities as well. But the basic step that is required to measure resilience or to even see if any change is happening or will happen, we need long-term data. Right now, there are very few such platforms which are collecting long-term data for Indian cities. One thing that I can think of is eBird, where any scientist, any bird enthusiast, any citizen can upload um, their bird observations, and it is specific for birds right now, like this eBird platform, and they have been collecting data for the past 15 to 20 years. So one project with IIHS that we did was to see how for the past 10 years birds are adapting to heat waves or urbanization in Bangalore. And we found that birds are avoiding the heated areas of the city and they are focusing, like they are like going to more greener areas of the city. So definitely birds are preferring areas with uh, cooler uh, temperatures. So to measure this, we need this long-term data for plants, for butterflies, for birds, for all organisms. iNaturalist is another platform where people are uploading their observations. That is not taxa specific, like eBird. Any flora or fauna related observations can be uploaded there. But again, in the Indian context, the observations are very scanty. We need a lot of data points. We need lots of years of data, and we also need um, multiple species to comment about these things. So I can confidently maybe like say that for Indian cities or even Bangalore, um, to say if the cities are resilient or not, or going biodiversity is declining, we can confidently say it using the eBird data. But for other taxa, it is really difficult right now because we don't have the baselines.
Great. Again, turning back, Mihir, to you about this ecological intelligence, that topic which I parked a little bit for later. Coming back to that, just coming to the practice part of, how do we bring ecological intelligence into our planning or practice, specifically with respect to urban planning and engineers who work on, preparing where in the city what kind of things will develop and come up. So, how can planners and engineers meaningfully integrate this ecological theory or ecological intelligence, such as species interaction or habitat connectivity? You talked a little bit about fragmentation. Ravi talked about it, or disturbance because of the regime. Either the biophysical regimes or other governance regimes into real urban design decisions. So, how do we bring all these concepts and theories of ecology for designing our cities, more so that we make them more resilient in the future?
Yeah, so I think one simple example we can take is of this whole concept of a sponge city. So basically, this concept came up, and now it is being replicated across the world in different areas. So urban flooding and waterlogging are crises which are common to a lot of urban spaces across the world because of the lack of permeable surface for the water to infiltrate, as it would naturally do without the built up basically. So now spawn cities basically are designed in a way that you have materials which make it more pervious for the water to infiltrate, or then there are a system of tanks or reservoirs which store the sudden inflow of water and then release it gradually over time, and so on. So if you think about this, these concepts are not they have not just been born up. They are actually mimicking natural systems, which is wetlands. And wetlands actually act as sponges in the natural wetlands, actually act as sponges. And it is not, when we typically see a wetland, different people, based on how their interests and training is, they look at a same habitat or a same area from different perspectives. So, for example, an engineer or a planner who is not familiar with certain ecological principles might consider that a wetland is just mainly storing water, or ecologist might think that it is only important for biodiversity. A person who is studying how the communities interact with wetlands and how they depend on the water resources can look at it only from that view. Actually, in cities, all of this is required at the same time. And the most important way in which we can sort of achieve this is by active collaboration and crosstalk with across these disciplines. So, like you mentioned, how can planners integrate this into the design? So, basically, if there is a person from an ecological background who can also give their inputs to the design which has been developed by the planning team and so on. That can in some sense try to balance this out a little bit. And wetlands is one place. I think the same also applies with a lot of green spaces in the cities now. Like there is a lot of emphasis being given on pollinator gardens, for example. Like, decline of pollinators being a global crisis can affect multiple other sectors, but then how can cities still provide certain resources and maintain and sustain these populations? Require some input from the ecologists or people who have been studying these processes for a long time. So I think in this way we can meaningfully integrate the theory which comes from interaction of species, how habitats are connected, and disturbance regime. Like, for example, Ravi mentioned extreme events keep happening more frequently in highly urbanized areas. So these are actually disturbances, and they can have very different effects on how organisms adapt or behave, and as well as how ecosystems behave. So in case a wetland has been severely encroached or choked with a lot of waste, it can no longer effectively perform its function of retaining that water and releasing it slowly. So this is where the restoration part comes in. So as I'm saying, there is no so you need a very collaborative and interdisciplinary kind of approach to look at any of this issue. We can't really keep doing it in isolation, because then we essentially end up nowhere. So that is the way we can, I think, integrate the intelligence gathered from ecological observation.
Yeah. Great. Like, a lot of times you refer to, integrating collaboration, interdisciplinary and all that. And I think this is exactly what the programs at IIHS, and especially about the sustainability science and practice does. So a little bit about, we talked about here how essential it is to integrate ecological knowledge or intelligence or theory into the planning and all that. But it's not so easy, Ravi, right? Uh, what are the biggest barriers to embed this ecological and system science that we gather from so many different kind of interdisciplinary studies in the urban governance and planning? Because they also have a lot of frameworks which could be also really complex. So there are these two different complex kind of a frameworks. One is from ecological and systems kind of a perspective, and another one is policy and planning and all that. So where do you see there is a tension? What is the what could be the barrier in embedding these two things?
So it is a little bit difficult question because like there are so many parties involved.
Yeah.
The other thing is what I feel in the Indian context at least, that there is a lack of awareness amongst the even stakeholders and the government as well. And be- uh, because they all think that these are separate processes. Nobody is thinking it of like as an integrated approach, or one thing is dependent on the other. So I feel once that awareness is built up from grassroots levels to like government offices and even policy makers, this problem will become a lot more easier. The other challenge is I would talk something from my experience, is getting the permissions to do the studies or even collect any baseline data. There are a lot of hurdles that one faces. Sometimes it's from the local, like not even the local government bodies are also not involved. It's the local people who are staying in that area who are little bit resistant to these kinds of studies. There is like lot of times there are comments that ये करके क्या होगा, क्यों कर रहे हो, इससे कुछ नहीं होगा, ये तो हम 20 साल से देख रहे हैं. But even if they are watching some animal or bird for 20 years, there is no information about it with the scientists available. So I feel that these are certain challenges. And then comes the next level when you have to go get some permissions. But there is a lot of delay due to the procedures that are set in place. And then a lot of important time is lost. Then, especially in the ecological context, if a breeding season of a bird is lost, then they have to wait for 1 more year to collect that data or do observations.
Yeah.
So I feel these kinds of problems are there right now, and it is mainly arising because people are thinking of it as separate systems rather than integrated ones.
Okay, great. I think that is one bigger challenge, right? Like, how do we make this as a norm? Like, think about everything in urban or even any other ecosystem as integrated. There is a feedback from one system to another. There are impacts. There are responses from different systems for those impacts and all that, right? And this is what exactly I think. We also cover a lot in our programs about how do we make these things, how do we see these things on a one layer, like, how do we kind of overlay one system on another and look at it as one integrated kind of a frame. But there is also a kind of a systematic methods to it, and that is where I think Mihir's input on how do we conduct these field research for students who are interested in taking up such programs. What are the different methods, like, what kinds of field methods, data tools, modeling approaches are most critical for studying this kind of a thing, and make it more, kind of palatable, kind of understandable, comprehensible to even layman or even to the policymakers. So what are those different methods and tools that you think? And we also cover those things in our program, right? Like, can you talk a little bit about those, Mihir?
Yeah. So basically, so the approaches which we would typically think that a person who's studying, say, tigers in some different forest uses, and the approach that we use in cities, essentially the methods are not going to change drastically. The basic ecological data collection remains the same. What changes is how are you going to collect that data, and what are the environmental or the other variables that you will be studying. So, for example, in terms of cities, you would probably look at what is the sort of land use pattern which is within the city. Is it a commercial? Is it an industrial or whatever? Because based on this, the type of effluents or pollutants which will enter in the system will change. Type of sort of the human footprint will change, and so on. Other than this, a very important tool for a lot of research, be it in cities or outside, remains the remote sensing tools, with which nowadays we can integrate multiple data sets, which can range from population data, census data, other environmental variable data, historical imagery, and so on, into one single sort of framework, and you can actually look at these patterns. What works best with, say, scientific community will not exactly translate into, say, a policymakers forum or the community who is sort of residing in that particular area. So the same information will have to be presented in slightly different manner. So this is where integrating a lot of GIS, which is a more visual kind of approach, you can integrate it with very visual media, which can include some inputs from art. You can have sort of literature, which can be sort of structured around these scientific findings. And some of these things are also being done at IIHS. I mean, Ravi is right here. I should not talk too much about the integration of art into this, because he's doing an excellent job at that. But other than this, the field methods will still include collecting data, going out on field, whereas a person in the forest will be trekking along some heavily vegetated part. Here you would probably have to move in between the different wards of the city, do door-to-door surveys if you are working on social or economic data. If you're studying, say, the ecological things in water bodies, you'll have to go and collect these samples. Again, nowadays the newer techniques which are emerging, which can help you analyze or quickly scan for the presence of certain species from small amounts of sample, they are available. Your environmental testing facilities are improved, so you can, you, with the same amount of sample, you get data on multiple environmental parameters, which can be for soil health, water health, air quality, and so on. So all of these things, I think, are there. And then, like any other framework, we also have a very robust use of statistical analysis, which has to go in before we can infer if something is actually happening or not. But the most important part of this still remains the hurdles which Ravi mentioned about, that for a robust statistical analysis, you would need a certain number of samples and certain effort to be put in, which can get little bit difficult to put in when it comes to cities because of the multiple sort of reasons which can slow your progress. So yeah, I think that was.
Yeah, great. I think we are talking a lot about this methods and possibilities, and what really we also cover in our program, like all these things what you talked about, right? Like whether it is other forms of representation through media, through art, through like remote sensing, using remote sensing methods or field ecology or participatory methods, all those things that you talked, I think these are really important things, and that we cover also in the program. But there are also other things like, students coming from, say, engineering background or a technical background, how they can position themselves to work in this interface, Ravi, particularly to you, I'm asking this, of how do we design these infrastructure um, for both ecological resilience and for cities resilience, right? Like that is the most important kind of a question, I think. And you talked a little bit about that, like Mihir also talked about how the planners could integrate. But these students who come from, say, different backgrounds, who come from engineering, from technology or technical kind of a backgrounds, how do they position? Like, what is their position in this kind of a approach where they have to integrate these things?
So I feel they hold a very important position
Mm.
in this context. Because as an ecologist, for example, like at least from my background, I don't have so much experience with coding or doing machine learning or even using artificial intelligence to extract the data, the ecological data. And I feel that people coming from these diverse backgrounds who have this experience can definitely help in generating these data sets, and not even just generating, but also helping in collect this data. For example, there are so many like bird calls that even one species of bird can make. And a lab like the Cornell lab based in US, they used a lot of artificial intelligence and collecting a lot of these sound or call recordings from birds, and using machine learning and other methods to upload these data sets, train the models. And now, like when you go out, you can use the Merlin app and it'll tell you all the birds that you are seeing in your backyard. So definitely this was not a job, like one ecologist's job to do all this,
Yeah.
bring it together. So much of planning and even building these recorders
Yeah.
Is something that somebody from a engineering background can definitely
Yeah.
help.
Yeah.
And I just gave you an example from the engineering background. But like somebody doing a wet lab thing using eDNA, we can get so much of information about the biodiversity
Yeah.
that is there.
Yeah, definitely. I think this has been a really rich discussion, and I'm looking at the time, and I just want to give little more time for our audience to ask questions. So, if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A box. Uh, we have one question. I'm just trying to read this. How can cities? Can you read me here? I'm just
How can cities be built to
built to
solve the problem of fragmentation and provide the
improve.
biodiversity with a larger connected habitat?
Any of you want to take this question? Maybe Ravi, you should take this question because you talked about fragmentation, how the biodiversity actually uh, could be corrected there.
So one way to reduce fragmentation, like the classical approach that ecologists or any wildlife biologists will take, is to make corridors. And in cities, these corridors are like more than important um, as compared to like a forested landscape, because the distance between habitat patches is quite a lot. So the green parks that are there, like campuses, or even like parks or areas that have vegetation, they can serve as corridors, and they might not be large, but even like smaller units of these green spaces in cities can serve as corridors.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that they will serve as a corridor for an elephant or a tiger, but definitely for smaller species of insects and birds, they are definitely very, very helpful. So that is one approach that the planners or people in
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
can take.
Yeah, I wanted to also come back a little bit to our program, and Mihir, maybe that is question to you about, uh, if a student joins this program, what kind of field exposure uh, do they get? Like, what are different things that we take them to see in the field, to either for the measurements or for just observations, or how do we train them to see through the ecological lens or through the resilience lens from ecological perspective? What kind of a field exposure that we give it to them? Can you just talk a little bit about that?
So typically, the program has a very interdisciplinary. The students who take up they come from a lot different backgrounds, and what we have designed the whole program is that the initial part is sort of to give everyone a overview of multiple other fields in which they may not have been trained before. So, for example, if a person from an engineering background comes in the program, they would be very well versed with the technical subjects, but they may not be very familiar with, say, how studies are done, how social studies are conducted. So, there is a component which will give them some basic orientation on that. And the field work, which actually is also interdisciplinary in IIHS, because we also are studying how these systems work in places like cities where everything is happening at the same time. So we have specific field visits for different subjects, which different courses which are being covered in the semesters. So in case for a ecology visit, we would take them to certain natural or urban area which has certain ecological features. It can be a small reserve forest, or it can be a wetland, or an artificial tank, or something like that. Similarly, they will have certain visits to different wards to study the economic aspects there and so on. But there is also a thing where we take them for exposure visits across different cities or across cities of different sizes to see how all these features change across when the size of the city changes. So there you would have a integrated exposure to not only the ecology, for example, but also the social, the economic, the infrastructural challenges and aspects, the governance aspects, and so on. So fieldwork typically is not going to be very specific to one discipline. But if there are specific labs for each course which are there, there we will try to give as much exposure to actually measuring the sort of uh, actually collecting the data, be it from environmental perspective or a planning perspective or so on. So in our ecology classes, we actually involve visits where we give students training in using instruments themselves. So this is a very hands-on kind of approach. So they'll use the instruments themselves, collect that data, and then they also have other courses where they are taught what to do with this data. So it is not only written in your notebook and forgotten. It's actually put into the system. You analyze it, you draw out patterns, you identify it, and so on. So I think this is a sort of overarching way in which the fieldwork and data collection is taught to the learners.
Yeah. Thanks, Mihir, for that. I think there is one question about the admission, and I think the admissions team from IIHS will answer that. But I still request audience to put in their question if you have anything related to the program or related to the topic itself that what we are discussing. Please put them in the Q&A box. To take the conversation forward, I just wanted to talk a little bit. I mean, ask Ravi and Mihir both about, from their perspective, what makes this program different from, say, environmental science program or typically what we see in other universities or everywhere else about this environmental science is a very popular kind of a subject. So how different this is, like, is there a difference and what is that difference from both of your perspectives? I would like to maybe ask you that. Ravi, you want to
So
go?
I would say that it is very different from environmental science program because I myself I have done environmental science at my master's level. Here you get to even like you get to study planning, a lot of practice projects. You get a feel of ecology, plus you are also getting to do grow cook it, which you teach. So that way it is quite interdisciplinary and also covers a lot of broader topics that environmental science does not definitely cover.
Mihir?
Yeah, I agree to what Ravi says. So I come from a very traditional zoology background. So shifting my understanding of zoology to the larger interdisciplinary feature here is actually challenging, but it's also extremely interesting because like Ravi also mentioned, we also learn a lot of new things. So when I interact with my colleagues or we go on the exposure visits with and interact with different practitioners or different specialists, it's like you learn so many things which you probably have would have never thought otherwise if we stay in our own particular disciplinary boundaries. But given that, I think we do not also compromise much on the disciplinary training. We also do ensure that during the learning process, the fundamental concepts are not diluted too much. We still convey those concepts, although the way they are conveyed is also quite different because uh, we have designed the programs in a way that we cater to a very interdisciplinary audience and which can also involve people from very different, like diametrically opposite, I would say, disciplines. So you can have a person who has done their MBA, for example, sitting in a class which is talking about how life originated on the planet. So this sort of knowledge is also designed and conveyed in a way which is comfortable to learning. And I think in the whole process, it contributes to a multi-dimensional kind of understanding of how, like, sort of how cities actually are in place.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. So it is really a distinct and unique kind of a program, I must say. There is one question from Satya Sangita. They ask about, 1 minute, yeah. How do you plan to integrate plants that are helping urban communities to manage with heat island effect, where canopies are could be at a different scales with apartments or spaces in balcony? Ravi?
Think this is a very specific question. I do not have the expertise to answer this
Yeah.
one.
Mihir, you want to say something, or I can say actually?
I mean, plants have been looked as one potential solution for sort of managing or like sort of reducing the heat island effects. But there is also a lot of ecological research which shows that planting the wrong plants can also actually lead to very different other consequences. And I think that is something also which needs to be taken into consideration. Just planting trees is not the correct solution for every problem. You need to have a solid reasoning of which tree has to be planted where and so on. So we are seeing a lot of these situations cropping up in parts of India. So, for example, the Conocarpus trees, which were widely planted across the country a couple of decades ago, and people have been warning that they can have a lot of adverse effects on human health because they cause a lot of allergy. The pollen causes a lot of allergies, and it has
Mm.
actually now led to sort of banning plantation of those trees, and a lot of cities have now resorted to removing those trees. This adds a considerable economic burden as well. So I think there is like, I mean, it's a very subjective sort of thing
Yeah.
that we'll have
Yeah.
to think in specific context of that.
Yeah. It is a very specific question, as Ravi said, and I think I would like to mention that one of the studies that I was part of few years back in IIHS, we were looking at actually urban agriculture practices and what motivates people, what are they doing, how are they doing it, and in what kind of spaces are people growing these plants. And I think recently we wrote a paper and it was published just exactly to look at this thing, like how the terrace gardens are actually helping regulate the indoor temperature in the houses below where there is the terrace garden is, right? And the results were really kind of surprised us also, seeing that in some areas, because there is really varying kind of a result, but in some areas where there is a built up density is too high, and there are a lot of other parameters about wind tunnels and wind flows and all that. With all those things, there is a potential of such terrace gardens to reduce the indoor heat by 3 to 6 degrees, which is not small amount, right? And these are in the peak season, peak summer kind of a season. So there are potentials, but as Mihir pointed out, there needs to be a careful choice and careful kind of a selection of what kind of species we are growing. uh, Having said that, there is one another question from attendee. Uh, we also can you read, Ravi? It is
We
too
also
small for
can
me.
tackle the problem of light and air pollution or heat dome or pollution dome through nature.
So there is a question. Can we do that? That is the question, I think.
Yeah. So I think light pollution is. I'm not sure how we can tackle it through natural sort of methods, because light is an entirely artificial construct that we have introduced through electricity and other things. But the effects of light pollution, which typically can are known to disturb a lot of species in and around the area, can be reduced by some behavioral changes which humans make. So, for example, you can have the light posts at a lower height where there are canopy above it, so that the light is not disturbing the nocturnal species which stay in the canopy. And like we have great examples of campuses in Bangalore city where you see a lot of very interesting and charismatic nocturnal mammal species, which are typically thought of to live only in very deep forests. So that is a simple way, reducing the intensity of light or adhering to strict timings when the lights come on and off and so on. So these are things. But again, what say an ecologist would term as light pollution would be very closely related to safety or a feeling of security when looked at from a different perspective. So all of this have to be thought in combination. But some issues like, for example, pollution domes or the heat domes can, like we for the heat we just had a discussion about it, how plants are one of the potential ways in which this can be done. And same thing, there are enough reports that if you have a good mix of plants growing in the area, you would typically find a lesser load of airborne pollutants there. So again, it depends on the context to context, but there are some ways in which we can integrate nature, and this itself is called nature-based solutions, which is something again IIHS and SES works on.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. Oh, there are questions coming. I was thinking that, if there are, this is really interesting now. How do you think ecology helps
bring
bring communities together in
cities to create a more resilient society?
This is to Ravi.
Uh, Let me think about.
There is a lot of things that you do about it, right, Ravi? Citizen science, and how do you get skills of these ecology to the classrooms and communities and all? Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think there are a lot of opportunities or platforms in the city. Like we have the Bangalore Science Gallery, which is doing a lot of exhibits focused around nature and cities, and bringing the community together. So such spaces are there. Then there is also a lot of outreach and art that one can do, like where we can involve the children, schools, even colleges, to have like to build these more resilient cities.
Yeah. Any ideas, Mihir, from you? You want to add something?
I mean, just to add one component is that like resilience itself is a very broad term, so it depends on which type of resilience you're thinking. And ecology can be one of the features in a larger set of things which can contribute to overall resilience, if we say. So I think involvement of the community, which involves multiple disciplinary experts and non-experts as well, is extremely important, because until and unless the people living in that place don't act on it, it is very difficult for some change to actually happen. And I think that is again something which IHS kind of uh, trains and also is built around, that we have experts from multiple disciplines under one roof. So it's very important that way to address some of these issues. And I think, like Ravi mentioned some time ago, that building awareness is extremely important. So once the community is aware of what the situation is and what are the things at risk, there are many examples where communities have taken up the issue on their own and then have like created really important conservation and community based conservation models out of this. And this is not restricted only to some natural areas. It is also very much seen in larger cities. across India. So I think this type of participation is actually quite important.
Great. Thanks. This has been a really interesting and for me also very kind of a delighting experience to moderate this discussion and learn so many things that the expertise was sitting next to me in office as my colleague, but these are the things, these are the moments where we also learn a lot of things from your own colleagues. I'm mindful of the time, so I'm just going to say thanks to everyone who has joined on this webinar. And we hope to get more applications to the programs at IIHS and just make a note of the deadline for submitting the applications is 20th March 2026. And we hope that most of the people um put in their applications, and we hope to have many of you in our classrooms. Thank you so much. Over to you, Subhay, if you want to say something about the next event or anything else.
Yes, thank you so much, Sheetal, Ravi, and Mihir, for a wonderful session. And we hope that people are able to join us for our webinar next week. All the links to our application are down and our prospectors are in the chat box. And we're having a Delhi Open Day tomorrow. So folks from Delhi can drop in and we'll be happy to answer your queries regarding any of the master program. Thank you so much for a lovely session and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Thanks,
everyone.
Mihir.
Yes,
Thanks,
thanks.
Ravi.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye.
bye.